Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Affordable housing plans are always a big part of election promises. So, how important will the issue be when it comes to casting your vote next month? Join our conversation now by calling 604 669 3733 or 1 800 825 5950. I'm Amy Bell in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And the lack of affordable housing is, of course, front and center for BC's voters this provincial election. And two of the three political parties have made promises this week. New Democrat Party leader David Eby pledged up to $1.29 billion per year in financing, up to 40% for first-time homebuyers, and said his government would support the development of up to 25,000 new units over 5 years as part of their Homes for People plan. Meanwhile, BC Conservative leader John Rustad has announced the Rustad rebate, a tax rebate for renters and mortgage holders for everyone who makes less than $250,000 a year. So we're asking you, what role will housing policies play in your vote on October 19th? Call us at 1 800 825 5950, 604 669 3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And as always, you can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining us now is Tom Davidoff, Associate Professor, UBC's Sutter School of Business. Hi, Tom. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey there. Thank you so much for having me.
So the NDP enacted a renter rebate of up to $400 off taxes last year for low and middle income renters. What is different about the BC Conservatives' proposal?
It's considerably bigger. It's a larger benefit, and it's universal almost,
Okay.
Rather than focused on households with low income. In fact, depending how it's structured, the Conservative proposal may give nothing to low income households who don't pay tax, and the benefits are larger the more rent or mortgage interest you pay. So that will be a larger benefit to more affluent households.
Do you think it'll work, though?
Well, it'll work in terms of giving money to people. Some adverse impacts. It may push rents and prices up a bit. That's inevitable whenever you make life easier for people who consume housing, especially when it's a bit of a subsidy to buying housing. But of course, it's quite expensive and has to be paid for with some combination of higher taxes and worse services. So, it would be more effective if you put more money in the hands of people who really need the help. And, if you're making $245,000 and take out a home equity loan to buy a boat, I think it's pretty clear you don't need taxpayer support.
Right. And I guess, in terms of will it work, but does the math itself work? As we increase these rebates, where does that money come from, and how much does it inevitably fall on the government to come up to these funds, and where do they access this money to, in turn, give to the people of the province?
Right. So if you increase taxes a little bit and give all the money to, needy households, for example, expanding the SAFER grants to seniors who are low income or disabled people who just have a brutally hard time paying rent, it's a small impact. It worsens the economy a little bit. Imagine the worst thing you could do is to just have everybody, kind of similar people, pay extra tax to write checks to each other. Obviously, that would be a wash. And by increasing taxes, you'd be messing up the economy.
Right.
So do want to be narrowly targeted without providing too much disincentive for people to work because, you phase out the benefit. And the broad benefit is great. I mean, people do need a lot of assistance with rent, so that's a good feature of the program. But there were some economists at UBC who thought about the idea of a universal basic income, which is everybody gets a certain amount of money funded out of tax payments. And they just thought that doesn't work. It's too expensive. You need to raise taxes by too much. This is like that, but it's a little bit worse because it does reward people with higher incomes. And it does encourage people to overconsume housing. So I think the idea of giving money to people to afford housing is terrific. It's an important part of any solution to the housing crisis. this conservative plan is intriguing, but I think it needs to go a little bit back to the drawing board to focus on where the help is needed.
All right. Tom, I'm going to take a call now from Ben in North Vancouver. Hi, Ben. Thanks for calling in. How important is this housing issue for you in the election?
Very important. I'm 19, and me and almost everyone I know has no idea how they're going to ever afford a home here, thinking about leaving the country even.
Right.
I'm a little confused as to how we're supposed to pay for the rest of that rebate. But I also really wish that the Conservatives would take a look at the blanket rezoning of the province. I think that was actually a really good move. So yeah, definitely going to be paying very close attention to housing policies from both parties.
And Ben, do you feel that as I'm so glad that you called in because we're always wanting to hear from these younger voters. Do you feel that the parties are taking into account what the future of the younger people of the province looks like?
I mean, they're trying. They're trying. At least I like to think they are. But until I see home prices drop, I can't say for sure.
Ben, I really appreciate you calling in. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Tom, that is a huge issue that we hear time and time again. It's these young voters that feel they're never going to have a chance for any housing opportunities. They find these various platforms perhaps confusing. They're skeptical that they'll help them. Is there more that we need to be done when it looks at that younger generation being able to afford housing? It's very different, obviously.
Yeah, that was a really enlightening call, and it echoes things I hear from my students, right? I teach business students at UBC who are a very selected group who are going to earn great incomes. And every semester I ask them, how many of you are concerned that even if you make a good income, you won't be able to afford a decent place to live? And, it's not 100% of the people raise their hands, but it's close. This is an educated guy, Ben, obviously. He sounded pretty articulate and knows about zoning policy. So my guess, and he grew up in North Van, so doing a little bit of demographic conjecture, I think he's probably going to be on the very high end of success for people in his cohort because of his background, and yet he's terrified he'll never be able to afford housing. So just imagine people who haven't had the advantages I'm guessing Ben has had growing up. It's a real problem. And Ben was absolutely right to mention zoning, right? Because
yes.
There's really two components to housing affordability. There's market housing needs to be cheaper, and some people can't afford market housing, and they need cash or they need non-market housing. So if you're going to push up demand by handing cash to voters, you really need to find a place for them to live, or else the benefits just bid up prices. And, there's been an important reform under the current government, which I will put my cards on the table here. I helped structure in some ways, but the idea is the province is cramming density down the municipalities' throats. Places like North Van have no incentive to allow multifamily housing because they get all the disamenity and infrastructure costs, and the benefits are shared by all jurisdictions. Right. So jurisdictions are going to get that trade-off wrong. They're going to overemphasize amenity and infrastructure costs and underemphasize housing. And that's why 90% of our land area is zoned for housing that kids like Ben are never going to be able to afford. So it's so important that we retain this mandate that municipalities allow at least multiplexes and when it's close to transit, multifamily housing.
And I'd love to have more people join our discussion. They can call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can share your thoughts through email, bctoday@cbc.ca. Tom, let's talk now about BC NDP's 40% financing plan. What are the risks and I guess what are the benefits and I suppose perhaps clear up some confusion around what this actually will provide for people.
Right. So let's start with what we're talking about, and then we can maybe do a bit of an evaluation. So it's an interesting program. It's starting at the Heatherlands. This is something I had nothing to do with in terms of the design. But a buyer who makes, between about 100 and 200,000, depending on the unit size we're talking about, who would be able to certainly rent a decent place and buy a maybe not so great place. But those are households that are doing pretty well. They can't afford a brand new a condo. So what you do is you say, okay, you pay for 60%. Essentially, the province pays for 40% up front, but you're going to borrow at an interest rate that's low of 1.5%. But on top of the 1.5% interest, which you don't make payments on until you move out of the place or 25 years come up,
Okay.
on top of that, the province gets any gain on the 40%. So if the price doubles, you owe 80% of the original purchase price. If the price happens to fall in half, you'd owe 20% of the original purchase price. So the return to taxpayers is a low interest rate, but then a share in appreciation. So if prices continue to escalate, the province ends up making money.
Right.
If prices collapse, which would be a problem scenario, the province is losing money on this venture. So, if the cost is $1 billion a year, maybe something like 100 million of that is a subsidy. I think the provinces probably should be getting a little bit higher return if they were a private sector entity. So maybe 10–20% of the money they're investing you could call a cost to taxpayers in expectation. The other 80% is just a loan. So we lose money today, but the taxpayer makes it up in the future.
Sure.
So anyway, so an interesting program. It does help new housing get constructed because it's only going to be applied on new buildings. So the pushing up demand without increasing supply, you don't worry about too much, maybe a little bit, because some of these projects would have happened anyway. And then there is a bit of a targeting issue, right? You're helping upper middle income households who certainly need help, like the Bens of the world probably will. But of course, you're not helping people with disabilities who are unable to work, people on minimum wage, people who haven't had advantages in life, who are never going to own a property, who need help the most.
Right, and who are struggling to find even the most basic of housing. And in terms of the people that this would help out, as you said, the 40% financing, if the increase, the property value increases over time and when they want to sell, that does sort of take away that ability to, I guess, create a bit of a nest egg from the real estate that you own and be able to pass that along, say, to your children or other future generations.
Yeah, I mean, you get 60% of the benefit, so most of it. So if you think, I was going to rent this place and now I'm going to participate in this program, I'm much better protected against future rent and price growth because I've got that 60% share, but I'm not going to hit the jackpot lottery bonanza.
Right.
And I think realistically, this is an interesting program because I think that's probably where homeownership kind of has to head in the future, because interest rates, they're high today, but generally they've been low by historical standards, and prices and rents seem to be under a lot of pressure from global migration and the difficulty of adding supply. And in that kind of world, owning all the future price growth it's not affordable to middle-class households. So some kind of equity sharing has to grow. The private sector has tried to design programs like this, and they're tricky because of some contracting frictions. So the data from this program will have some value. It is possible there'll be some contracting problems and the province will lose money on this. If they do, that's informative. If it works well, that may help spur a private market along these lines.
All right, I'm going to take a couple more calls now, Tom. Sandra in Chilliwack, thanks for joining BC Today.
Oh, hi there. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to clarify the $400 you mentioned a few moments ago. I'm pretty sure you said it was $400 off their taxes when it is not. I received that $400 cash. I did not take $400 from my taxes. It was a $400 tax credit cash in my pocket.
Okay. And do you feel that was fair?
Oh yeah, I was quite thrilled with that. The only thing that concerns me is Rostad has ignored low-income people who do not pay taxes on their income.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, Sandra. And John in Vancouver, thank you for joining BC Today. What are your thoughts on housing in the election?
So I haven't heard anything about my question in the upcoming election. I don't know if it's even talked about. but I currently live in a co-op, and I have for since 2012. And I know living in a co-op isn't going to build my personal wealth or equity, but it certainly provides people who are middle or low income a place to live. And I don't know why, both federally or provincially, we don't hear about building more co-ops.
John, I really appreciate that comment, and Tom, I'll throw that to you because we hear from audience time and time again whenever housing is brought up, co-ops and the demand for them and the wish for more of them is brought up, but it does seem largely to be ignored by many of the parties. In fact, it isn't brought up as a viable option very much at all. What are your thoughts on co-ops and why they're seen as such a solution? As he said, it won't give him, a monetary nest egg to pass along, but it does provide affordable and safe housing for his family.
Yeah, it's an interesting contract. It has provided lots of people like the caller with security. And so I certainly don't want to poo-poo it as a solution, but it's complicated and it involves government intervention. And again, there are some contracting issues. If your household shrinks, do you get to stay in the co-op in the same unit? Or do you have to size down like your household did? If your income grows, do you get to remain? What happens to your rent? So there's some complications. And I think inevitably there's conflicts among the owners, which happens in any kind of shared living environment. Condos, rental, purpose-built rental, owner, units, townhomes, single family. There's so much experience with those, and the market knows how to build them. In my opinion, there's really, as I mentioned, two issues to solve. There's not enough housing in the market, and so market rents are too high and market prices are too high. And then the problem is some people can't afford them, even if you brought prices down and rents 20%, which probably won't happen. Even if you did that, there's lots of people who can't afford it and they need help. I think government should focus on those two issues, and keeping them separate is fine. So deregulate, allow or force less zoning restrictions at the municipal level, so more market housing gets built. That brings down rents and prices. And for those who will never be able to afford even older units, you do cash transfers. Sometimes you try to do the double Lindy flip and combine those two things in things like co-ops, in things like mandated affordable units, in otherwise market projects. And I think that can lead to a loss of focus on what's really important. And it sometimes prevents projects from getting completed because the private sector knows how to finance market housing. More niche type projects just take more work, and the incentive sometimes isn't there to make it happen.
Okay. We've got time for one more quick call. Al in Burnaby. Hi there. Thanks for calling in.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm doing well.
I just wanted to make a comment. Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about the multiplex legislation. I was very excited about this legislation, and I own a single family lot, which I had planned to put 4 or 6 units on, and I was very excited about it. But once I got into the details, I've seen at least Burnaby has implemented incredible fees, DCC and infrastructure and all sorts of other costs to the tune of about $60,000 per unit added. So, doing 4 units adds $240,000 just in fees before development is done. So I think that a lot of this is a talk about creating housing, but in reality, we're adding to the problem when these fees are just on, to the new buyer, which is going to create less units built. I think that a better approach would have been to have the infrastructure costs spread out amongst everyone if we really want to have a chance at getting a lot of housing built.
Al, thank you for that point. And Tom, you and I were both nodding along because this is something that we've heard since this plan was launched, that the fees are just so prohibitive to the person that is attempting to do these multi-units, and that again, that gets passed on to the new buyer. And that again, it's this vicious circle of unaffordable housing. How do we get out of it?
Yeah, well, there's a delicate dance, right? Because government is handing owners like Al the ability to do something that they want to do with their property, which adds value. So suppose Al were allowed to build a 50-story tower on his lot, right? it would be wrong for government to just leave all that money on the table. Some of the benefit should go to government because Al's going to make so much money that of course he's going to do it, and it's free money to charge something.
Right.
If you only let him build a little bit extra density, if you charge enough money, it's not in his interest to do the project. So I think as long as the fees aren't killing deals, they're a good idea because the public is handing a benefit to a certain class of private owners, and it's not unreasonable to claw some of that back. But if you're making transactions not happen, then the government doesn't get any money and we don't get any new housing. Right. So I think we need to monitor over time what's going on. And there were some words in the legislation limiting municipalities to clobber deals with fees, but that needs to be monitored.
All right. Tom, unfortunately, we have to leave it there today for time, but thank you as always for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Tom Davidoff, Associate Professor, UBC's Sauder School of Business. It is 12:26, and this is BC Today. Yesterday, we asked you what reforms you think are needed in the healthcare system, and we got a lot of emails from you. Donna writes, I am a retired hospital pharmacist. For-profit clinics focus on the low-hanging fruit. They concentrate on low-complexity areas to maximize profits. The fallout is the patients with multiple issues, often requiring hospitalization and lengthy follow-up, land in the public system. Our healthcare professionals do not need even more stressors leading to burnout. And Lynn writes, why not conduct a complete review of the cost of our various health authorities in BC, especially administrative costs? Perhaps positions could be reduced, eliminated, and funds spent on frontline medical care. Lauren writes from Salmon Arm, would love to see more holistic health centers that focus on prevention, early intervention, and functional health. I have severe degeneration in my spine due to an old accident. My doctor first acted like I was exaggerating my pain, then x-rayed it and recommended surgery to cut the nerves, the two common extremes. Instead, I use natural anti-inflammatories, massage, and physiotherapy, all out of pocket. The pain is completely gone as long as I keep up the treatment. This kind of intervention is so much less expensive and gives me higher lifetime productivity. I don't understand why the government does not want to do this. And we did hear from Suzanne, who writes that her experience has been good. She's 63, has 2 teens, one of whom was born with a lot of medical conditions, which means a lot of specialists. And she got referred to an orthopedic surgeon, and she never had to feel that the wait was anything extraordinary. Thank you for your emails. Our address is bctoday@cbc.ca. The way sexual orientation and gender identity is taught in BC schools is set to be a factor in the provincial election campaign. There's been division over the issue on the streets and between party leaders. Meanwhile, educators say the issue is fear-based and a distraction. On the early edition today, the CBC's Chad Pawson says the BC Conservatives are promising changes, and that's not a shock to political scientists.
Not that surprised that the BC Conservatives are taking this tack because it's probably important for the BC Conservatives to draw a line in the sand to show this is how we are different from the ruling BC NDP. And of course, they see it as an issue that enough people care about that it might gain them votes in certain ridings that they need to win. They're running a candidate in Chilliwack North, Heather Maas, who as a school district trustee in Chilliwack has been very outspoken about how sexuality is taught in schools. So it's not just about SOGI 123, but also books in libraries. She's been outspoken about the types of books that have been in libraries that some parents have spoken to us about, that they deem them inappropriate, that they are exposing children to pornography or inappropriate materials in these libraries, and this concern over the books. And John Rossett has told media that he would strike some kind of committee that would review these materials to make sure that they are appropriate. So they've gone down this path to say, hey, listen, we hear you people in the community who are upset about this, who are concerned. And these people care deeply about this issue because they believe that they have rights as parents,
Of course.
that they want to look after the rights of their children, and they want to protect them in the education system. And so, yes, this is resonating with the Conservatives. And as we said, it's a kind of line in the sand saying this is how we're completely different than the BC NDP. And if you park your vote with us, then we will make some movement on these issues.
The CBC's Chad Pawson speaking to Stephen Quinn on the early edition today. And you can read more about that story on the CBC News app and on cbc.ca/BC. This is BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC. YouTube at CBC Vancouver, and on the CBC News app. The CBC News with Rob Zimmerman is next.
Good afternoon. BC residents could find out who has won next month's election in about the same amount of time it took to start counting ballots in previous votes. Andrew Watson with Elections BC says new electronic vote tabulators mean officials are aiming to have half of the preliminary results substantially complete within an hour of polls closing October 19th. In previous elections, which involved manual counting, Watson says the tallying would start about 45 minutes after polls closed. The threat to properties near Grand Forks has eased from a wildfire discovered yesterday across the U.S. border. The regional district had issued a hasty evacuation order for residents on the west side of the city, but officials now say the threat has eased. Still, residents of 150 properties have been told to be ready to leave on short notice. And a magnitude 3.8 earthquake struck off BC's coast early this morning. Natural Resources Canada says the quake happened at around 4 o'clock, about 11 kilometers southeast of Sydney. The department says the quake was lightly felt in several areas, including Victoria and here in Vancouver. And now the forecast on the north coast. Rain this afternoon with strong winds and a high of 11. Highs to 15 with increasing cloudiness in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, showers late this afternoon with a high of 11 as well. Highs up to 19 with some sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a high of 19 with increasing cloudiness. And a chance of showers this afternoon in Greater Victoria. Rain in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley, with highs around 16. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob.
You're welcome.
And yesterday, Vancouver chef Hidezaku Tojo joined Michelle on stage and showed off his creations. The film The Chef and the Daruma about Chef Tojo is showing at the Vancouver International Film Festival. And Roger sent this email. My first experience with sushi was at Tojo's earlier restaurant, the Jinya, in the 1970s. I was very nervous, but we all steeled ourselves for raw fish. And what a treat! Nigiri sushi served on top of a large block of ice. Thanks, Tojo, for introducing us to such delicious food. We've never looked back. Mara writes, I was lucky enough to have Tojo as a guest chef at my farm-to-table cooking school in the Cowichan Valley in 2001 with his very good friend, the late Nathan Fong. Tojo is a national treasure. His creativity, craft, and dedication to local are second to none. Thank you, Tojo. And Mara also sent us a lovely photo of Chef Tojo cooking in the kitchen with Nathan. Thank you for your emails. Our address again is bctoday@cbc.ca. Joe also writes, I also first started my Tojo journey in that small restaurant just off Canby and have made it a point to celebrate life's milestones by indulging in Tojo omakase. Long may you roll. Sushi pun intended. And starting today, employers in Canada will face new restrictions on the hiring of low-wage temporary foreign workers. A policy shift the federal government says will push businesses to make a greater effort to hire workers already in Canada. Now, under the new restrictions, employers will be limited to hiring 10% of their workforce through the program's low-wage stream. Employers will be unable to hire through this program if they are in a census metropolitan areas with unemployment rates of more than 6%. And contracts for low-wage positions will be generally limited to 1 year. So how do you think the temporary foreign worker cuts will impact Canada's labour force? And what do you think is a better long-term solution? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, restaurants have recently become a major employer of temporary foreign workers. Outside of agricultural jobs on farms and nurseries, the top 3 most popular positions approved last year through the temporary foreign worker program were cooks, food service supervisors, and food counter attendants, according to federal data. And for more on how these new restrictions might impact that sector, we're joined by Mark Van Shelwitz, Vice President, Western Canada Restaurants Canada. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Amy.
So how do you feel about the shift away from temporary foreign workers?
Well, certainly the new rules on TFWs will certainly have consequences on some of our members who, in certain rural and remote areas, even though that temporary foreign workers make up only about 3% of our 1.2 million Canadians that we employ, it was really, really necessary during the pandemic and continues to be in certain geographic locations where there really is no alternative but to look towards immigration to fill those demands, simply because, we have a demographic and geographic labor shortage. We have half as many people entering the labor force than we did a decade ago. So certainly there are big challenges, and the vast majority of our restaurants are completely Canadian owned and operated, and all their employees are Canadian. For certain restaurants, it has been a lifeline for them just to make sure that they can continue to be operational.
And, what were some of the specific factors that have led sort of in this last year to the restaurant sector becoming so dependent on the temporary foreign workers?
Well, you've got to remember, we've gone through enormous change in the last few years. I mean, we still haven't fully recovered from the pandemic. We've got half of our industry not making any money. We've got a job vacancy rate, which is twice the average of any other sector. And, we're also a large employer of youth, in fact, the largest employer of youth. And when those people aren't entering the workforce, in certain regional locations, our members don't have much of a choice. However, they'll be the first to admit that this is a Band-Aid. They don't want temporary foreign workers. They want permanent residents. And, we applaud various provincial governments putting in a tourism and hospitality stream so we can get these permanent residents in. In a lot of cases, those people that started as TFWs, became permanent residents, are now owners and managers of restaurants across the country. So I also think it's important to point out, Amy, that we are a very diverse industry. 31% of our restaurants are ethnically owned and operated, and we're also one of the most multi-ethnic workforces in the entire economy. So, what we're hoping with the federal government is that at least they would sit down and consult with us so that we don't have this one-size-fits-all solutions, which doesn't take into consideration the socioeconomic and geographical conditions in various Canadian markets. So that's certainly a big factor going forward. And many of our members are also really concerned, saying, why are we being picked on? Agriculture, as you mentioned, food processing, construction, there are exemptions for these sectors.
Right, and healthcare.
Not for ours, even though we've got the demonstratively higher job vacancy rate.
Well, what do you say, I guess, to criticism of the program, that it exploits these foreign workers or stops proper wage growth for all workers? Even the government has been critical, saying that, the program was misused by some employers.
And certainly if there's any misuse, that we're not there, but that's talking about a few exemptions or a few exceptions, not the rule.
Okay.
By and large, the vast majority of people that are hiring temporary foreign workers, it's just simply not true that it's less than Canadians. You've got to go through, they're very expensive employees. You've got to go through all the red tape and about a $14,000 cost just to do the processing to get them here. They have to pay prevailing wage rates, which are above entry level wages that are coming into the industry. So a lot of the critics that say that, I think, don't understand the issue well enough and don't understand the realities of how the temporary foreign worker program works. So, and every opportunity, if a Canadian restaurant has the opportunity to hire locals first, they will do that. It's just simply in their best interest to do so. And one of the changes, difficulties that with this is why have a temporary foreign worker program anyways if you can only have them for a year? By the time you process, they get a work permit, they're into the establishment, you only have them for a few months and then you have to get a new batch.
Right.
Instead of having these people stay here permanently so that they can become part of the permanent workforce. And Amy, we've been pushing the federal government for long-term solutions on labor for a long time because they understand these demographic labor shortages as well. And for example, we're pushing a matching program. We've got about a million work permitted immigrants in the country right now that aren't working. And we need programs to sort of give them the education and the language training and then match them into our industry. So there are long-term solutions out there. And we were just hoping that we could get to the table with the federal government and talk about these things and get a little bit more flexibility in some of these rule changes. And we're still working on that rather than this one size fits all solution that was imposed on us without any consultation whatsoever.
I'd love to get some more of our audience's thoughts on this, Mark. So please, if you want to call, the number is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Let us know how you feel about these new restrictions for the foreign workers, the temporary foreign workers. Do you think they're a good thing? Do you think that it is penalizing certain sectors and certain workers? And what is a long-term solution for this labor shortage? And also, if you have been working as a temporary foreign worker, what are your thoughts on these new restrictions that come in today? Mark, you said you were hoping there would be more consultation and a bit more flexibility. Were you surprised that there was none of that from the government before they enacted these new rules?
Yeah, certainly very surprised. I know that, there are ongoing consultations all the time with federal government and with various industry sectors. And on this particular one, we think we could have come up with a much better solution that was a bit more flexible, that still achieved the federal government's policy objectives, but without punishing, especially those local restaurants and tourism areas, that where the area may be above 6%, but the actual resort area, there are chronic labor shortages, and we have to bring those people in. But there are better ways than the temporary foreign worker program to do that. But just want to say that for certain businesses, having those temporary foreign workers come in, even though they make up only maybe 10% of their workforce, it allowed them to operate at full operational hours. And if you don't have those people in place, you're not being able to operate fully. And also, if the worst case scenario, if you don't have the employees, you're going to shut down, and then all the Canadian employees lose their hours and their work as well. So it's a pretty complicated issue, and it also has an impact on our Canadian employees. And we are the fourth largest employer in the country, third largest here in BC. So what this has the impact on is on all those small restaurants in every community across the province, especially those rural and resort areas.
And I was going to ask you, what impact, could we see, not only in the restaurants, but for those that go to the restaurants, how would their experience been impacted? But as you're saying, it could be the case that some of these do have to shut down.
Yeah, and of course nobody wants to see that. And even if they don't have to shut down, what are the implications on hours of work? What are the implications on owners and managers, working extreme overtime hours because they're trying to cover off for these labor shortages? And talking to small business owners in the restaurant community, it's sort of like they're burnt out. They're working so many hours to try and keep their businesses afloat, because since the pandemic, as I mentioned, half of our industry is still not making any money. Their costs have gone up by over 20%, yet menu inflation's only gone up by 5% because we have value conscious guests that also have to tighten their belts and have less disposable income. So it's been a real challenging time, and these changes just add one more challenge to the list of challenges the industry are facing right now.
I'm going to bring in a call now from Rob in Vancouver. Hi, Rob. What are your thoughts on these new restrictions to the temporary foreign workers?
Okay, well, I'm not an economic expert, but I did take
That's fair.
the 2 intro courses in my business degree years
All right.
ago. Ever since I learned of temporary foreign workers 10 or 15 years ago, I've found this to be it's totally at odds with a supposed free market economy. In a free market, there's supposed to be free movement of labor and resources. But we bring in these temporary foreign workers from a different economy with a lower equilibrium, and they're willing to work for wages that our people aren't willing to work for. So it just skews everything, keeps these wages artificially low for years and years because we keep using these workers. I can't remember if they updated this, but traditionally these workers were tied to their employer. Like, we have farmers working in the Fraser Valley here, living in these shacks that the farmers build, and if they're unhappy with their job, they can't quit. And unless I think they updated it recently, I can't remember, but they didn't even have medical coverage or anything. And this is happening in Canada. This is just ridiculous. I say no temporary foreign workers. Let the economy reach an equilibrium. Wages have to come up. You can't just import cheap labor from an economy where they have a different standard of living, an entire different economy. What is this? Just a few steps removed from slave labor. It's just disgusting.
Rob, thank you for calling in. And Mark, you can hear that this issue does raise a lot of big feelings for people, a lot of concerns for people, that we are bringing these workers in and that we're somehow treating them poorly, that they're not, that they're perhaps being taken advantage of and having to work for lower wages, perhaps working in conditions that most people would not work in or would seek to go elsewhere, which they are not allowed to do. How do you respond to that perception?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. I mean, I was speaking to some of my friends too that just assume because they go into a quick service thing and they see a bunch of ethnic minorities there, these must be temporary foreign workers. And in actual fact, in most cases, these are actually Canadians. When it comes to wages, we have already far surpassed our wage growth in our sector is much higher than the average of other sectors. So that argument's not there. And as far as the whole slave labor thing, that's just simply not true. There's prevailing wage rates. They have to comply with the same employment standards and all the labor rules that we have in place here. So, these assertions that this is somehow slave labor and that we're exploiting these people is simply not true. They're more than happy to come here to work, and and in most cases they don't want to go back. They want to be here as permanent residents, and we encourage that. We want more permanent immigration because we understand long term we've got demographic labor shortages that are not going to be addressed simply by hiring more Canadians, because those Canadians just don't exist in certain markets, especially young people, because there's just far fewer people entering the workforce. So we need long-term solutions, and I understand the emotional sort of things, and where people are coming from, with a lot of misconceptions about what the program really is.
I agree. There's always a lot of misconceptions, but there are some concerns that with these new restrictions, that it could potentially put some of these workers in the position where they're working perhaps I hate to say under the table, but perhaps not following all the channels they would have before that would give them protection, that they'll be put in a position where they could be taken advantage of because they do need the money and they do want to have that employment. Are you worried at all about that these changes could unfortunately exploit some workers?
No, I just don't think that's a reasonable case to be made. I mean, the temporary foreign worker program, and I think even going back a decade ago, so many rules, so many protections are built in, and the employers themselves with temporary foreign workers, they're not just providing them the jobs at prevailing wage rates, they're also helping them get integrated in the community. They're helping with housing. they're helping with lots of things. And I think you would have to go to a temporary foreign worker themselves and say, are they appreciative of the opportunity of working here? Or would they prefer not to be working here? In which case, you have to ask, well, why are you coming here to work in the first place? So a lot of these are misconceptions. Same thing about the slave labor thing. That's just, a ridiculous comment. Sorry, but in reality, we're paying prevailing wage rates, and these are very productive members of the crews that they're. But I also want to highlight just how minor of an issue this is. I mean, we employ 1.2 million Canadians, and the temporary foreign worker program supplies maybe 1% to 3% of workers in our industry, and only in those cases as a last resort where our employers through the LMIA process cannot find Canadians to work in these establishments. So there is a need, but again, I just want to make the difference between a temporary foreign worker and a permanent residence. And what we need is more permanent residents. And I think we need an immigration policy that's focused on the economic needs and where those labor shortages are most acute. And in our industry, our job vacancy rate is much higher than a lot of other industries. So, many of our members feel like, why are we being singled out for here? What about agriculture? What about
Right.
construction? What about all these people that are getting exemptions from these rules when, we have a bigger need when you look at the job vacancy rate?
And have you received any answer as to why the restaurant sector has particularly been, left out of these exemptions?
No, we haven't got that. However, we are working with folks in the federal government, and I think they understand some of our rationale that, some of these rules like the 20% to 10%, when is that going to happen? Can that be a little bit more flexibility built in there? And on the 1 year piece, I think it's really, most small businesses are not going to be able to go through all that paperwork, all that extra expense to bring in foreign workers. By the time they get them trained up, they're there for a few months and they have to leave again. So it doesn't make sense. And I think, that fact alone should show that this really is a last resort type of thing where our members are using these employers, this temporary foreign worker program, because if they had the choice not to use it, they wouldn't.
All right. And to be clear, it was before a 2-year cap on the temporary foreign workers?
Correct.
Okay.
2 years makes sense because then at least, you can get them trained up, you can get them integrated in your operation, and you can have them working for you for a while. But after a month, it's really in reality only a few months of productivity that they're being able to provide to those businesses. So I guess to conclude, Amy, on this particular point, we need long-term immigration solutions, and the temporary foreign worker program has always been a band-aid. And if we have an alternative to it, we would gladly rather see that as far as bolstering the numbers of cooks and chefs that can come in through permanent residence programs, whether they be through provincial nominee programs or express entry or other federal programs. That's where we need to shift the focus to. And I think you'll find most of our members, they don't want to see temporary foreign workers. They're really, and a prime example, Alberta just introduced a new tourism and hospitality a P&P program. Our members flooded that with a number of applications because what they really want is not temporary foreign workers. They want permanent workers, and they want these people to become permanent residents and contributors to their communities and to the restaurants in those communities.
I just have an email from Charlene that I want to read out. It says, sure wish all the folks who tend to be conservative, who shriek about various sky is falling issues, especially immigration, would decide whether they are upset about those people coming in and driving up rents and taking all our jobs, or upset that businesses are in trouble without them. And I think that does speak to a lot of the emotions that are triggered when we do talk about immigration and employment right across this country. It can be quite a hot button topic. Mark, what can the restaurant sector do to attract more workers? It is clear that, as you said, the temporary foreign workers has just been a Band-Aid solution. You want people that are there to work long term, but it's not happening. What needs to be done, or what could be done?
Well, I think many of our members are already doing it. And I think the pandemic, really changed things. We lost so much of our workforce because we couldn't offer the hours through all these restrictions. And it's been difficult getting them back in, but I think been largely successful in getting most of those people back in. to our industry. And, you know, we are already offering great compensation packages, and people sort of look at us as a low-wage industry, which really in reality is not true, especially when you factor in gratuities. You know, the average liquor server in BC is making about $50 an hour
Oh, yeah.
if you combine their tip income in it. But the bottom line is, and you can't ignore the facts, and the facts are that we have long-term demographic labor shortages, and even worse in certain regions, in geographical labor shortages in this country, and we have to address those. I mean, the other alternative, and I mean, this is already happening. Our industry went through its highest number of bankruptcies ever in the first quarter of this year. Many of our members are just holding on. They've got all that post-pandemic debt. They've had these huge cost increases of over 20%, including labor cost increases. Yet they've got consumers that are very reluctant to pay more in their menu inflation charges. So, you know, we can't raise menu prices. We're stuck with all these prices, and we don't have any labor. So there's a lot of challenges. And I think what we don't want to see happen is, you know, your favorite restaurant in your local community shutting down because they just can't find the labor. And, you know, it's just not a competitive business practice. Even before the pandemic, we've always been a very labor intensive, low margin industry. And now it's really tough just to survive in the restaurant industry. And we want to see this industry prosper and employ more people and contribute to communities all throughout the country. And, you know, without public policy that helps support that, you know, it hurts Canadians, it hurts communities, and it certainly hurts those brave individuals that are trying to start restaurants and trying to survive in a very, very challenging market.
And we've heard that time and time again, just how precarious it is for people in the restaurant industry and for those that are running them. I've got time for one very quick call from Kent in Tawasin. We've got about 20 seconds for you to make your point, Kent.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
I'll be really quick. I feel that you know, this has not really been well represented. There's a lot of struggling small business people that would be quite happy to have young people work for them. Wages are not nearly as low as been described. Temporary foreign workers are often making $25 an hour, $30 an hour, and their housing is inspected generally. There's going to be exceptions, but I think that characterizing this as near slave labor and that there's all these bad employers out there is really unfair. And I would welcome any bureaucrat who makes these decisions that affect these businesses to actually walk in the shoe of some of these small restaurant owners or farm owners or small merchants that are struggling right now.
Ken, I thank you for calling in. We'll leave it there, and that's where we'll have to end the segment for today. But nice to have that balance of callers. And Mark, thank you so much for being with us today to really shed some light on this whole issue.
My pleasure, Amy.
Mark von Schellwitz, Vice President, Western Canada Restaurants Canada. And that is our show for today. You can always email us at bctoday@cbc.ca.